This is Terry Davis with Purple Mountain Institute, and I'm talking to my very good friend, Kayla Sandberg Lewis, who has a wealth of information and she's so fascinating. It's going to be kind of difficult to keep this narrowed down, but I've asked her to talk with us, to talk with me about brains and about the nervous system and about breathing and how that impacts our own health and well-being. Kayla is a behavioral medicine provider. She has a master's in behavioral medicine and has done biofeedback and neurofeedback as a practitioner for many, many years, and probably knows more about brains than anybody else I know. So I've asked her to just give us sort of, a beginner's manual, a beginner's guide to brains and the autonomic nervous system, which is so intimately connected with stress and finding ways out of stressful feelings inside, and to speak a little bit about breathing as well. So that is a massive topic that I've just laid out.
Oh,
um,
we can do it.
we can do it. I have great faith in us.
Well, thank you. Um, we could start with the central nervous system because people like to think of the brain as it, and the brain likes to think of itself as it. But the central nervous system includes a spinal cord. And so the spinal cord comes up, and then at the top of the spinal cord, there's this little fist-like structure that's the reptilian brain or the brain stem. And the reason it's called the reptilian brain is that reptiles have them. Anything with a vertebrae, spinal cord, is going to have the brain stem. And that's really ancient. And it goes all the way back to the beginning of time, beginning of evolution. And then we grew the rest of our incredible brains around that as the millennia went by. We have the brain that can think and be discerning and love and all those other wonderful things that we can read, we can write, talk, all those things built up around that. Now the brainstem doesn't have that capacity. It's very limited as far as what it can do. It can set off alarms, but it can't go to therapy. So if you have some kind of trauma in your life, or something has happened and it's kind of stuck in this system that's so prehistoric in nature, you can't, talking about those things is going to have less of an effect than doing things that can soothe that brainstem. And the brainstem is the seat of arousal. So when we are over aroused by trauma or anxiety or all sorts of different things, that's coming from the brainstem, and we have to address the brainstem. That's why neurofeedback is so good for addressing arousal issues. You can be under aroused or over aroused. So that's kind of the story of the brainstem, and it's got the autonomic nervous system in it. The autonomic nervous system is also a product of evolution. It's the automatic way of dealing with things that you don't want to have to think about. You don't want to have to think about breathing. You don't want to have to think about digestion or all these other blood pumping. If you had to think about those things, you'd never get anything else done. So this automatic system or autonomic system was put in place. That sounds weird, but it evolved to take care of these things. And there are two branches to the system. There's the sympathetic, which sounds really nice, but and there's parasympathetic. And the sympathetic is also known as fight or flight or freeze. And the parasympathetic is rest and digest. And so the purpose of this, both of them, is to save our lives, to build our lives in the parasympathetic and to save our lives in the sympathetic. So parasympathetic is, big word, anabolic. It's building. It helps create our nutritional storage house and helps build the body. Unfortunately, the rest and digest isn't necessarily going to be in charge all the time. So when we go into fight or flight, that's catabolic. And that takes things out of storage, out of the nutritional warehouse, and pumps it into our muscles so that we can fight, flee, or whatever else necessary to survive. And so if we get stuck in that catabolic place, we end up with stress-related disorders, chronic fatigue or hypertension or type 2 diabetes. All these things can be the result of a stuck autonomic nervous system. Is that helpful?
It is helpful. And it sounds like, that's a lifestyle for so many people, and kind of especially in this day and age, in this culture, and that there seems to be so much conflict, or so many opportunities to feel like, oh, I should really be afraid of that.
Yeah, well, evolution didn't help matters any, because I mean, it was a wonderful way to evolve. But the thing is, if we were out on the veld gathering grubs and a twig snapped, we would jerk our heads up, hold our breath, swivel our ears around, something I don't know how to do, but try to figure out, where did that sound come from? Was it danger? Was it a predator? But you have to do that in a nanosecond. And so the critters that were able to do that and get out of the line of the predator or fight off the predator were able to survive. Their descendants had more of that wiring, that neurological response, or they had higher access to that. And through those trillions of generations that we've gone through since then, it's gotten more and more hardwired into our system. And so now we can have this startle response that triggers the autonomic nervous system go into fight or flight when the phone rings, or somebody just whispers your name or taps you on the shoulder. I mean, really not, so people with high startle responses, they're on edge all the time, and they're triggering that. And it's really my job to help people learn how to not do that, because when that gets triggered, there's a whole cascade of physiological changes that happen in the body, right down to the pH of the blood and the skin conductance, the sweat on your hands,
Right.
sweaty palms, that sort of thing. So that's the consequence of millennia of evolution, is this hardwired propensity to go into this state that, unfortunately, if you stay there very long, is going to be detrimental to your health.
Right. And that hard wiring seems like an important piece of it. Like if those little critters on the veld, the ones who were mellow and enjoying the sunshine and resting, didn't have opportunities really to pass on their genes or their innate knowing. So I think that so often people may feel, I get startled very easily, for instance, and then I think that, well, maybe is that because of trauma? But a person doesn't have to be traumatized. They just have to be alive. And to have this ability to get into that state of alarm
I
that
ask people to reframe their thinking about it, because very often people feel uh, defective with a high startle response. And I said, no, it's a talent. It's a misguided talent, but it's a talent. It's your life on the line. And so so we have to come through our system and kind of rewire. And you can do that. It takes a lot of work. There are a lot of different systems in the body that need to be addressed, but that it can be changed.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that can be changed is, like you suggested, breathing, and how that breathing can rewire things. Now, the overarching term for all this is cultivated low arousal. So if you call it cultivated low arousal, you sound like hate a lot to get your education. And
which I'm sure you did.
you can also call it stress management. And then but that's the common term for it. And it's retraining your system to not respond with such a overblown, and people have, when I talk to people about this, they say, yeah, but what's going to happen if an 18-wheeler's come? Am I going to be so relaxed that I won't get out of the way? If a truck's coming at me? And it's like, actually, the crazy part is you'll have more reserves. You are more likely to be able to respond appropriately to a real threat
Mm.
than if you're spending all your energy on these low level, or remote threats. Like when you watch the news and you see something happening halfway around the world and you take it on yourself. Yes, we have empathy, but do you take it on physiologically? If you take it on physiologically, you're hurting yourself. You're not helping those people, you're hurting yourself. So it's important to understand that you can still be a compassionate human being and empathetic to others, but not have these strong physiological responses to stress.
Right. So how might the breath help with that? I mean, you were talking about the autonomic nervous system, and so the breath, it just automatic. We breathe, our body breathes, our brain stem breathes. So how can we use the breath to maybe not have such a physiologic response to bad news that's presented, nonstop on various screens and devices?
Yeah, we're exposed, that's for sure. Well, you need to know a little tiny bit of anatomy. And one of the pieces of anatomy with the brainstem is that there are these cranial nerves that are coming out of there. One of them, it's a very popular nerve these days. It's called the vagus nerve. So almost everybody's heard of the vagus nerve. It's the 10th cranial nerve. And what's special about it, and another nerve in the system, is that it's called the trigeminal nerve. People tend to know about the trigeminal nerve because if they have TMJ, that's what's going on there. But both of those nerves are sensory nerves, meaning they're picking up what's going on in the body, in the places that they innervate, and they're motor nerves. They tell those parts of the body to move. So the vagus nerve in particular is taking in information and taking it back to the brainstem, saying, "Hey, Terry's in trouble," and then the brainstem goes, "Oh, we better set off the alarms." So you can fool your brainstem into thinking the world is a safe place. by breathing differently.
Hmm.
And that sounds pretty simple, except it's something you've been doing your whole life, and you probably will have some difficulty changing how you breathe. But that's the point of exercise. We do these exercises over and over again until they become first nature. And that's the cultivated low arousal. We cultivate our capacity to not go off the deep end every time something happens. So the vagus nerve, among other things, innervates the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is this giant muscle that's stitched around the bottom of your rib cage and looks kind of like a double Hollywood bowl dome kind of thing. And it sits up there. And the crazy part is your brain, we think of the lungs as breathing. They don't really breathe. They're just passive, and they process air, but they don't suck it in or push it out. What does that work are the muscle and the muscles surrounding the rib cage. And so the diaphragm is the star of that job. And very many of us don't use it because all the times we've been startled, remember when we were on the Veld, we jerked our heads back and held our breath because breathing is noisy. So if you do that often enough, you may not start up breathing again that diaphragmatically. You may keep your breathing in the upper parts of the lungs. The lungs are shaped like traffic cones. They're cone shaped, huge. They start behind your clavicle, your collarbone, and they go all the way down to the bottom of your rib cage. And you got two of them. They're very porous, they're very fragile, so they need all these bones and these intercostal muscles to protect them. Because if you didn't have the rib cage, you wouldn't live very long. You'd squish your lungs. So you need those bones there. And so we have all these muscles, and the problem with something happening that we move our breathing up into the upper part, hold the breath, and then we breathe rapidly, we're getting a very small exchange of gas because the area is small. When you use your diaphragm, you're using the base of those lungs. And so you've got this huge area to fill up, and you can breathe slowly. Well, they know how many breaths per minute are soothing. 6 to 8 breaths per minute correlates with a calming, soothing. It actually massages the vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve goes back to the brainstem and says, Teri must be feeling pretty good. She is breathing at that nice rate that we know is conducive to feeling good. And so she must be safe. There must not be a predator. And the brainstem goes, great, I'll call off the alarms. I'll turn off all those alarms. But if you keep breathing up here, it doesn't matter if there's no predator, if there's no anything. Your brainstem is not getting the message from the vagus nerve. It's just getting this rapid exchange of gas.
Right.
And reading that as danger. So the problem with that rapid exchange of gas, if you breathe in about 22 breaths per minute, that's absolute hyperventilation. And that is only 1% of all the hyperventilation in the world. And it's usually associated with something, well, pregnancy can cause it, but it's usually a pathology. The 99% of hyperventilation is considered chronic hyperventilation. It's below that 22 breaths per minute, but it's still like 18 to 20, something like that. And that is very conducive to all these stress-related disorders we talked about. And there's a ton of different ones. Are you going to put show notes in the bottom? We could put the miserable man handout that I sent you, the
Oh.
little guy. It's a picture of a miserable person. It's a cartoon of a miserable person, and then around it are all these different systems, these symptoms that can come out of different systems in the body based on this chronic hyperventilation, or over breathing is another word for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you continue doing that over breathing over time, your body is going to compensate, because you're actually messing with the pH of your blood. And you know your pH of your blood has to stay in a very tight, narrow range. And so if you're blowing off too much, what you're doing when you're hyperventilating is blowing off too much carbon dioxide. That's why they have you breathe into a bag to get that carbon dioxide back in your system. And so if you're breathing off all that carbon dioxide, even though it's a waste product, it's necessary to have some of it in your system. Your body is going to do something, a compensatory thing called the Bohr effect, Bohr. And that changes how the hemoglobin holds oxygen. And it won't let oxygen off when it gets out to tissue. It'll hang on to it because there's this relative deficiency of carbon dioxide. And so if you have the Bohr effect, and you go to a stress management person, and that stress management person says, I want you to do diaphragmatic breathing. It'll make all your problems go away. And you sit down and you try to do diaphragmatic breathing. You may start seeing spots. You may get dizzy. You may get angry. You may start coughing. You may pass out. All sorts of different things can happen because you have this compensatory thing that is already saying you don't have enough CO2 in your system. And now you're flooding me with oxygen. I can't take this. And so we have to do something to uncouple that Bohr effect and allow the hemoglobin to do its job, dropping off the oxygen. And so I have a request of my clients to pick 3 cues, 3 things in their day that they come across intermittently that will help them remember to do a little exercise to change their breathing pattern. You cannot ask somebody to change their breathing pattern out of, universally. It's just not going to work because it's autonomic. You want them to be able to live their lives at least part of the time. So you want to be able to get something that they can do when they remember to do it. And then over time, that will uncouple the Bohr effect. So the 3 cues that I always recommend, because they work for me, are doorknobs, faucets, and light switches. And I choose these because they're transitional. You're going from one room to another, indoors to outdoors, whatever. And light switch, dark to light, light to dark, and faucet, dry to wet. There's a transition going on there. And the exercise I suggest is that you take in a deep breath, just one deep breath, and count. So if you can count to 8 while you're taking mentally, take in that breath and then hold it to 4 and then exhale to 16 and through pursed lips. So you're very slowly letting this air out. And what that's doing is, excuse me, there's an alarm on me. What that's doing is holding the carbon dioxide in your body and helping recalibrate. And if you do, it won't work just once. You have to do it repeatedly. So through the day, every doorknob you see, every faucet you use, it helps, but it's going to take a long time. You've been doing this breathing pattern most of your life, so don't expect magic results, but it will work over time, and you'll be able to do your diaphragmatic breathing and massage your vagus nerve. So is that helpful?
That is helpful. And if somebody tends to be a shallow breather or a rapid breather, and they're doing this breath pattern, doesn't matter how fast they count up to the 8. It sounds so they can still stay within their comfort zone and
Correct.
really focusing on, extending that out breath, holding it in and then extending the out breath.
Yeah. And to know that you're using your diaphragm, you can just touch the base of your rib cage.
Right.
And as you inhale, that should expand, that the rib cage should move
Oh,
out, out. I know that a lot of people gauge by the belly, whether the belly goes up and down, but those are completely different muscles. And people can actually kind of dissociate the muscles. So the diaphragm needs to be the thing that's getting engaged. There are unfortunately things that can get in the way of the diaphragm working, such as abdominal surgery with scar tissue, um, uh, an accident like from a car accident with a seatbelt, causing that kind of thing. Or what else? There are just, tucked posture. If you're not sitting up straight, then you can't get your diaphragm to work. So posture is important, and you could lie down if sitting up is uncomfortable, but it's the base of the rib cage that you're going by. So
mhm.
if you have that impediment to the diaphragm working, I suggest working with a body worker who can do structural integration or myofascial release kind of work
Right.
to get in there and help the diaphragm be released.
That makes sense. So if I'm thinking of like 6 to 8 breaths a minute, is this sort of sweet spot in my brainstem for feeling safe? Would it be helpful to, let's say, work with a second hand and see, well, can I take a breath in 10 seconds? Can I see what that feels like? Just to have
Oh, yeah,
second breathing pattern.
right. And I wouldn't get upset with myself if I couldn't do it at first.
Uh-huh.
It's something, it's like, let's be playful with it rather than demanding of yourself. That's another thing about the autonomic nervous system. And there's actually a vocabulary that goes with it. The rest and digest, the words you want to use is allow, or attend, don't make them imperatives. The words that are sympathetic words like, or fight or flight words are like must, have to, like that kind of thing. So how you talk to yourself has a very strong effect on how you breathe and how what your brainstem is picking up on. It doesn't have word capacity, but it listens to the emotional valence of what you're telling yourself. So if you're very critical of yourself and very perfectionistic, you're probably going to have a harder time getting into parasympathetic dominance. Loving kindness is about the only way towards ourselves. And, a lot of us are really good with loving kindness towards others. And when it comes to ourselves, it's like, oh, that doesn't seem like a great idea.
Right.
I'm letting myself off the hook, So, but the truth is, that's where we have to go.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I think that you're right that can be the most challenging. And that it's so easy to get drawn into this critical place. It certainly is for me, and thinking, okay, now I know what I need to do. I need to do it. I need to do it now, and I need to do it right. And then that in itself, even just saying that, it makes me feel like my breath is kind of constricted.
Raises the arousal level right there.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And the information going that it being a two-way street. I think when I first started just paying attention, to sort of what goes on within me, a moment, every now and then check in. One of the things that surprised me was how often I held my breath, all during the day, I would find myself, and even if I wasn't startled, probably just some thought went through my mind, that I wasn't even aware of. And you're saying, and even every time I did that, now the vagus nerve is going back and saying, oh, she's in danger.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I do a very extensive intake with my new clients, and I ask, are you aware of any breath patterns such as breath holding or rapid breathing? And I can't tell you how many people have sat there and gone, no. It's like
Right.
exactly what they're doing. And I
Right.
think it's particularly prevalent with women, because I think it's dangerous to be wrong. So if you're asking a question, pay attention when you're talking to, other people, and just see if they hold their breath when you ask a question. Because I think people are frightened of being wrong. I think it's hardwired into our systems that we need to be, because being wrong is very dangerous, especially around predators. So I just have observed that over the years.
Hmm. Yeah. But I love that, just finding three things and using that as a cue to, oh, okay, let me, breathe in for 8, hold it for 4, breathe out for 16. And as if
Whatever's
breathing,
comfortable. Yeah.
like you said, through pursed lips. So
Yeah. Because that's just going to slow you down a little bit more, keep the oxygen, I'm sorry, the carbon dioxide in your system a little bit longer, and then go about your day until your next cue. And when you notice that, oh, I am not doing that, I've been through 4 doors since I start, don't berate yourself. Don't get, just say thanks for the reminder. I'm going to get back on track, and try to be as kind to yourself as possible.
right, that is so crucial and can be so hard. I know.
Yep, definitely hard.
Right. You know, Jack Cornfield, who I often listen to and for guided meditations, and just because he's a fun speaker, but he has talked about, this critical voice that, some of us have, and, that can really be, loud and demanding now and then. And he says that, when he has a critical thought, or, this is stupid, or I can't do this, or I'm too fill in the blank, that he just says, well, thank you for your opinion, and carries on. And I just love that,
Yeah,
and even if I started doing that, I would hear, oh, that wasn't really my original opinion after all, as, I'm slowing this down a little bit. So
that's great. I like that. Maybe I'll steal that.
kind of, right? Yeah, it is. It's just such a kind, gentle, oh, okay, yes, I
Yeah.
acknowledge.
Yeah, there are different things like the trigeminal nerve. We can get into chewing
Yeah,
and all that kind of stuff, because it's the same thing. If you're bolting your food, or you're eating when on the go, while you're driving, that sort of thing, the trigeminal nerve is telling your brainstem that you must be in big trouble to be doing it that way, because that's not a way to get your food. I mean, you're getting food into your body, but it's not going to be well digested, or build your system the way the rest and digest is operationally set up. So
Right.
it's best to, it's boring, but it can be boring. Chew your food until it's liquid. That old naturopathic phrase, drink what you chew.
Right, yes.
Make sure it's liquid. So
Right.
it can change all sorts of things. I had an experience with one of my very first clients back a million years ago when this very sweet elderly woman came in. She's probably younger than I am now, but anyway, she seemed really old back then.
Right, yeah.
And she had been through everything looking for what was the problem with her digestion. And she'd had since she was 16 years old, and she had had exploratory surgeries and multiple interventions, and they'd tried different drugs and nothing was helping her. And so I did the intake, and then, we were going to get started. I had just peripheral biofeedback back then, but I said, over the weekend, before we get started, I just want you to experiment with chewing your food until it's liquid and see whether that you notice anything different. So I was supposed to see her on Tuesday. I got a voicemail on Monday. I'm canceling my appointment. And she sounded completely different. She sounded angry. And so I called her and I asked, I said, may I ask what happened? She
Right.
said, everything's better. She was all, she was so angry that she'd
Ah,
been through decades and decades of medical abuse, essentially. And she said, all somebody had to tell me was to chew my food. And that was,
wow.
so I'm glad I helped her,
Right, yes.
but yeah.
Hmm. Well, this feels like a good first session, does it to you?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Seems like it worked.
I think so.